Welcome to Craft Chat Chronicles, the go-to podcast for tips on crafting best-selling fiction. Here at Craft Chat Chronicles, we bring you expert interviews, insights, and tips on writing, publishing, and marketing. Join the conversation and embark on a new chapter in your writing journey. For workshops, show notes, and more information, visit jdmayall.com. That's jdmayall.com.
In Season 2, Episode 4 of Craft Chat Chronicles, we'll be chatting with author and editor Hena Khan. Hena will be giving us a deep dive into crafting compelling middle-grade fiction. She'll talk a little bit about her publishing journey, writing picture books, give some tips on school visits, and so much more. So, without ado, let's get into Season 2, Episode 4 of Craft Chat Chronicles. Let's get chatting.
Thanks so much for chatting with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Tell me about your life before books.
Before books. Honestly, it's hard to separate my life from books because they were a part of my earliest life and memory. Ever since learning how to read, I remember that being such a big moment in my family, and how proud my mom was. And I remember sounding out words to her and her feeling and feeling her pride. And actually her making me perform that ability in front of other people. So that, and then trips to the library, like she was a big advocate of reading. So she would take us pretty regularly. And so my childhood was filled with books. And that was a lot of how I spent my free time was, with library books, and living in stories.
That's cool. What inspired you to become an author? How did you start your publishing journey?
So, I never considered it. I wasn't doing a lot of creative writing at the time. I was working in public health communications. So I was doing writing and editing, but for technical audiences. And I had the chance to write for kids because of a friend who was working at Scholastic with their book clubs. And she needed help with editing and rewriting a book for a series called Spy University. And knowing that I love to write, and we had written together back in school on our high school newspaper, she asked if I would, give it a try. And that was the first experience I had writing for kids specifically. And I had to master the voice and try to imitate the style of the book that she was working on. But that just opened up the whole world of writing for kids to me and made me realize it was something I wanted to do. And I was also a young mother at the time, and it made me think about the stories that I didn't have as a kid that I wanted my children to have, and sort of sent me on that path to eventually writing my own stories.
How did you get your agent?
I went the traditional route of querying a bunch of people, and getting a lot of rejections. And eventually Matthew and I connected, and it was, just super excited and grateful. And I think we've grown through this process together. He represents a lot of adults, and so I think I might have been his first, picture book and middle grade author. So I feel like we've been figuring things out together, but have a great understanding, and he's been super supportive of me. So I'm happy it worked out.
That's good. What do you consider the core elements of a good middle grade novel?
Ooh. For me, it's always about the things that I cared about a lot as a middle schooler that I think are the universal concerns of being a kid. So, a lot of friendship and family and concerns around belonging and fitting in, and just kid-sized problems that don't feel like kid-sized problems when you're experiencing them. But I think we need characters that are super relatable, that readers can connect to, who feel really authentic and multidimensional, and encourage readers to think in some way is really, I think, is the magic of middle grade. I just want to live in your background. It's so beautiful.
It's a Zoom background, a picture.
It looks so nice. I'm like, oh, that looks fantastic.
How did you make the switch from writing to editing traditionally published books? And which do you have a favorite, or do you love them both equally?
So the first editing, oh, I'm sorry. Do you mean editing the anthology that just came out?
Yes.
Is what you're referring to? Yeah. So this was my first experience editing a volume like this. I had done, professional editing for public health organizations, so I was, familiar with the editorial process, but not working with authors who I greatly admire, and not putting together a compilation like this. So it was definitely a new experience, but I loved every minute of it. I loved, conceptualizing the initial idea of an interlinked volume of short stories taking place at this community center, and then having, a bunch of South Asian American writers who I really, really look up to and whose work I love, join me to sort of piece it all together. And I've always loved editing, perhaps more than writing in a way, because to me it's more natural, and I struggle with first drafts like a lot of writers do, and I'm always filled with a lot of self-doubt, and I love the process of going back even to my own writing and putting that shine on it and revising. So I loved having the chance to do that with other people in their writing, and yeah, and it was just a fantastic group of authors. Some, really well respected and award-winning authors, and I mean all I strike that all wonderful, well-respected authors, but some who've been doing it for a very long time, and others who are newer to writing middle grade. And so it was lovely to have that range of experience, and just everyone's unique perspective and
How did
writing
the
style.
anthology come to be? What's the concept behind it, and how did it happen?
Yeah, so I owe a lot of it to author Ellen O, who I was speaking with about this idea, and she had a similar anthology uh, of called You Are Here, of East Asian writers that hadn't been published yet, but I knew she was working on it, and I was toying with this idea, and she was very encouraging, and she pushed me to connect the stories, which ended up being a bit different from her anthology in the way I chose to approach it. Um, but I thought of, an interlinked anthology of short stories where the characters would all appear in each other's stories, and they would all be taking place at the same location. And then the stories themselves would build to a bigger story in the background. So once I had that idea, I reached out to the various authors and asked them if they wanted to be a part of it, and was so happy that they all agreed. And we got some sample story ideas. We decided to set the stories at a fictional community center set in New Jersey. And like in my hometown, community centers were often a place where immigrant communities will rent out halls to have various functions, whether it's religious celebrations, or birthday parties, or graduations, or prayers services, or charity events. And so it's just a big it's something that all of us had experience with, and that's why we decided to set it there. But then there's also a larger story about the community center itself, and what's happening to it that, is meaningful to all of these kids who are connected to it in some way.
Love that.
Thank you.
What techniques would you give to aspiring writers on crafting a good middle grade novel?
Mm. Let's see. A few things. I would really recommend reading a lot of middle grade before starting, if you're new to the genre, and seeing what speaks to you and the types of stories and voices you really connect with. And um, I think it helps to have a lot of beta readers if you're new to the genre as well. Kids, if you can access some, but definitely other writers and people who you admire to give critique. I think especially when I was writing my debut middle grade novel, I think I made some very novice mistakes of oversharing or overtelling my story, maybe because I was telling it to myself. So I think having other people help you cut down your story to what a middle schooler really cares about and might focus on is really helpful. As well as having those young readers who can make sure that you have the voice and the details right. But I think it really is about looking at the world through the eyes of a young person and not telling them what to think. um, and I think a lot of us are still, as adults, concerned with the same things that kids are, like whether it's, does my friend still like me, or how am I going to reach this goal, or how do I help my loved one who's going through a hard time. Those are all concerns we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and it's just a different point of view, a younger point of view. But I think a lot of times as adults, we might feel like we need to tell kids how to solve their problems or how to navigate life. So I think avoiding any type of preachiness, or, you know, just, yeah, any type of preachiness and feeling like you're being taught a lesson is probably the best way to start, and just trying to find that authentic, relatable voice.
Okay. And once they found that relatable voice, do you have any other advice for helping them develop good characters? Hi, JD Mile here. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to thank you for tuning in and to let you know that this episode of Craft Chat Chronicles has been brought to you by Heart's Gambit, my debut novel. It's available for pre-order right now at barnesandnoble.com. What is Heart's Gambit, you ask? It's about two time-traveling families, one cursed magical duel, and the pair of star-crossed lovers who might break the cycle if they don't break each other first. If you love the time travel romance of Outlander and the lush, haunting magic of the night circus, this is the book for you. Pre-order Heart's Gambit today at barnesandnobles.com and grab your copy when it hits shelves on February 3rd, 2026, wherever books are sold. Again, pre-order Heart's Gambit today at barnesandnoble.com and grab a copy when it hits store shelves on February 3rd, 2026. And while you're at it, don't forget to buy a copy of today's guest book and support their projects as well. Support authors, support bold stories. Now, back to Craft Chat Chronicles. Let's get chatty.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it helps me to ground a character in some kind of reality. So most of my characters are inspired by, at least part of their personality is inspired by somebody I know, and then I build around that. So whether it's someone fictional that I've read in a book, if it's inspired by another character or a real life person, but you want to make sure you really know your character well, and to make them multidimensional, that they have more to their personality than one key trait. You want to give them lots, just like a regular person would have many sides to them. You want to make sure your character feels as real as possible. Um, and you know, and flawed and um complex and nuanced and all the things that you want in a good character that's going to make you believe that they're real as a reader.
What makes a good villain?
Ooh. um you know, apart from some of the pick your path style stories and fantasy books I've co-authored, I haven't had true villains in my stories.
Mhm.
And it was fun in those books to make them, you know, over the top and um, as evil as possible. But I think a good villain is actually just as multidimensional as the protagonist. You know, if they're just a caricature of a person, then they're not as compelling. But I think if every character has something redeemable or something likable, we're seeing this, you know, even in film and superhero movies, we're seeing the misunderstood villain as a hero. And I think it's because all of us have, you know, things that in us that we work hard to suppress, and some people aren't as good at it. So, you know, I think it's recognizing that there is a very human element to the villains as well. They shouldn't be too extreme.
Love that. How would you suggest that aspiring writers who want to get into middle grade hook their young readers from the start? Like, how do you grab the audience, especially the young audience, that early in a book?
Yeah, I think there's so many different ways. And you know, it's funny, my newest middle grade novel that I authored solely, Drawing Dina, came out in February, and my opening chapter takes place at the dentist. She's sitting in the dentist chair. And I just met a third grade teacher who was talking about how he does first chapter Fridays with his students and how he read the opening chapter of Drawing Dina to his kids. And he said they were begging him to keep reading. And I started laughing because I said, you know, I had so much doubt about starting this book at the dentist office. And I was like, what am I doing when I was writing it? But I think it's a matter of, you know, taking your reader to a moment where they feel like they're there with you, they're invested, they understand your character through their actions, through their words, through their thoughts, you know, a combination of all of that. And they're just in it with you. In action moment. It could be a quiet moment, but it's a matter of just sort of making your reader care about your character as quickly as possible. Because if your reader doesn't care, they might not want to continue to read.
Very true, very true. How do you avoid the saggy middle in a story? Like, how do you avoid losing that momentum halfway through?
So I know everyone has, you know, a different way of going about writing. For me, what helps me is outlining my story ahead of time, not in a great extent of detail, but enough so that I have some sort of roadmap so that when I do hit that middle point and say, what am I doing? I can go back and at least see what I had been thinking would happen next. And of course that it changes as you write. But I think, you know, having a strong sense of at least your goal in writing and, you know, the overall story arc and point, can sort of help you get through that part. And then of course, you know, as I said, I think I'm a natural editor. So that's the part I probably spend the most time on where, you know, I'm building to that climatic moment and trying to make sure all the pieces are there that, you know, the reader needs to feel satisfied. So, you know, it is a matter of, for me, mapping it out first, trying to achieve that, but then going back and really finessing and sort of massaging that middle section, because I do think that as much as a writer you can get lost and frustrated, that's where you really need to make sure your reader is going to stay with you to the end.
And how about the end? How do we tie it up good? What are some tips for that? Like, do middle agers like the happy ending? Are they okay with the?
That's something that I think I've had to work on the most. I've always, ever since I was in grade school, struggled with conclusions the most with my essays. And I always felt like, well, I've said everything I've had to say. Why do I need to repeat myself? So, of course, in fiction, it's a bit different, but I do think that we have to resist. I know I've had to learn to resist the temptation to tie everything up super neatly for our readers. And if you're trying to convince them that a story is believable, you have to keep it, um, believable all the way through. Mm-hmm. So just like in life, our problems don't all get solved very neatly. I think it helps to end on a hopeful note. That's what I like to do for middle grade, but not, have every part of every challenge resolved. And yeah, to keep some doors open. And of course, that's also helpful if you're ever considering a sequel or continuing the story as well, not to have everything, complete 100%.
Love that. Love that. What was your biggest surprise with the idea of publishing that you had before you became a published author, and then the reality working in the industry? What was your biggest surprise?
I think it was how much work comes after a book is published, and how much work you do as an author that has nothing to do with writing. So all of the business side of things, all of the marketing and promotional activities, all of that was a big surprise to me. I think I knew that there was the writing and, expected the editorial process to be rigorous. I understood the sale of a book would be difficult, but I didn't realize how much I would do later that is outside of my element. And I think a lot of writers are naturally perhaps more introverted, or, not really dying to be on a stage or have the spotlight and be a public speaker. And, all of that has taken me by surprise. And a lot of it's been wonderful, and I've learned to adjust, and some of it's draining, but it wasn't something I understood before I got into the industry.
Did you have to do a lot of, or do you do a lot of school visits and things like that?
I do a lot of school visits, and that's something I enjoy very much, like connecting with readers and getting feedback from them and understanding the way they think and, their questions is so valuable. So I adore doing school visits. It's more of the, giving a keynote is something that I also really appreciate, but it's just nerve-wracking because it's like, all of a sudden having 1,000 eyeballs on me isn't something I'm thinking of when I'm writing a book. So yeah, it's just been a learning process, but it's good. It challenges you to grow in different ways that you wouldn't think you might have to as a writer. And being a public speaker, right? Having to market yourself and do social media, for example, or some unexpected things like even having a interview with a puppet, it's something you just didn't think you were going to have, but can be really fun in the end.
Very true. So for a newly published author, what would be like the 4 or 5 marketing things that you would suggest that have worked the best for you?
I wish I knew what really worked in marketing. I think depending on who you're, what age level you're working. Did you ask middle grade? Sorry.
I'm asking middle grade because that's mostly what you do. But
yeah.
If you want to elaborate in other areas, go ahead.
Well, I write picture books too, but yeah, I think it depends on your age range, who you're trying to reach. But I could answer the question for middle grade. Let's see what has worked. I think, however you can feel comfortable engaging with educators is a wonderful way to get your work out there, because they are so instrumental in getting your book into the hands of readers. So whether it's through social media or by attending conferences or writing for outlets that they might be reading, I think that's excellent. Um, it's hard to know how much general social media engagement helps, and every day it seems to be changing. So I'm not the best at social media. I try, and I can't say I know whether or not there's certain strategies that work better than others, but like I'm not on TikTok, for example. So but I think just being positive, being authentic, um, trying to connect with people, whether it's kids or parents, any way you can really is always well received. And I think it's, the best way to share your books. Yeah, obviously public events are always fun, but they can be hit or miss. So it's always changing. It is, it is, it is the hardest part, I think.
I love that. You mentioned school visits. Do you have any tips for doing that well? Like, what have you found? Like, are there any activities you do with the kids, or do you bring something for teachers? Like, any tips that you want to?
Yeah, I love talking to kids. And I think what's been effective for me over the years is, through practice, really learning how to speak to kids at different ages at the level that they can relate to what I'm saying. But really, at any age, speaking to them as equals, and um, and really being very honest about some of my own challenges with writing and editing, um, and being afraid, or feeling less than, or comparing myself to others. And I find that so many kids, who readily admit that they don't think they're good writers or don't like reading, it's so wonderful to be able to try to challenge them and get them to realize that everyone can be a good writer or a good reader, and it's a matter of finding the ways to be inspired and to want to do it and to practice enough. So I think just being really real with kids and not talking down to them is really important. They love visuals and, goofy pictures and all that stuff too. So that helps. Um, and, uh, and they love stories. So whatever interesting stories you can bring are always well received too.
How was your debut year? Like, did you have a launch party? Like, did you do anything?
So for me, my career was sort of, um, spread out over a long time. So I started as a writer for hire for Scholastic book clubs, like I mentioned. And then I had my debut picture book come out back in 2008. So it was really different then in terms of social media. And I didn't have a debut group or anything like that. I did have a surprise party thrown by my husband, which was really fun, for family and friends. But it just felt really different then, and it's been fun to see the industry sort of evolve. And for me personally, to have a community of diverse authors that I feel very connected to. I'm now on the board of We Need Diverse Books, which I'm really grateful for all they've done to expand the landscape for children's literature and adding diverse voices. But when I started, I felt a bit isolated, and I wasn't sure if I would ever publish a second book, or what the industry, how it would receive what my first book, and what the market would be like. And so each time at the beginning of my career, I felt like I was waiting and seeing what might be next. And I finally sold my first novel, Ominous Voice, back in 2016, and that felt, at that point I had an agent, and that felt like the moment to really invest full time in this. But before that, I was writing part-time for kids. I was consulting for public health organizations, or still working for them. And I didn't even call myself an author for a long time, even though I had published books. I used to refer to myself as, communication specialist, and I also write children's books. So it took a while for me to own this as my profession, and really to feel comfortable making this my full-time work.
That's awesome. So what do you guys do with We Need Diverse Books? I know you guys used to have like scholarships to help with housing and stuff like that. Do you guys still do all that? What are some of the programs that you
Yeah.
do?
So there's definitely scholarships for writers and also for industry professionals, to try to expand that. We need more, diverse editors and people working in the publishing industry. We have various campaigns to get diverse books into the hands of readers. There's the Walter Awards, which is a wonderful award for diverse books that also involves getting those books out into the hands of readers. And then special programs for, against book banning, for example, to help the fight against book bans, to support different communities, respond to, various things happening in the media and in the world. So, yeah, really, really great stuff.
Important work. Good to hear. Good to hear.
Yeah.
I'm going to segue back. I'm sorry if I'm jumping around.
No worries.
I
No
promise
worries.
when I write it, everything will be in order.
I'm sure. No worries.
I just when you said that, I got curious because, like I said, I used to know a little about it, but the industry changes. So I wasn't sure if what I thought to be true was still true. So,
Yeah. Sounds like it is.
okay. With picture books, how does that process work? Do you, like, in general, how does your relationship work with your agent? Do you discuss this is something I'm interested in writing and then, discuss if it can sell beforehand, or do you just create and then send it? Or how does that work? And with picture books specifically as well, how is that, process I imagine is different than the middle grade?
It depends on, if you're writing middle grade as a first time middle grade writer, any type of book for the first time, you will likely write the entire book and then try to sell it, whether it's, a middle grade contemporary or a fantasy or a graphic novel, you'll write the whole piece or the whole work. With a picture, and then after you've been published, you might not need to write the whole thing. You might be able to sell it on a proposal with a few chapters, for example. But with a picture book, you really need to write the whole picture book. And of course it's fewer words, many fewer words. But I think it's harder to sell a picture book on a proposal. So with my agent, there's times where I've written a whole picture book because I'm excited about it, or I think I have the concept, or I want to see if it works. So I'll write the whole thing and then share it with my agent and see what he thinks. And he'll, weigh in and then, decide if we want to go forward with it. Sometimes I'll have an idea, something specific will pop in my head, and I think this could make a picture book. What do you think? And I might just, mention it. We might talk through it and sort of workshop it together. So it really depends on how fully formed my idea is and how strongly I feel about it. If I'll just jump right in and write it first. But since I don't illustrate, once we do, get a manuscript ready to submit and then sell it, then the acquiring editor will help pair us with an illustrator who brings it to life and brings, their own take on it, which is always the most amazing part of writing picture books, is seeing two creative minds come together and with their own vision and create something magical.
I love that. Do you see yourself doing more anthologies in the future?
I would love to. Like I said, this was such a fun experience, and I know I've heard others talk about how it can be challenging at times, and I wasn't sure what to expect, but really it just brought me so much joy to be able to do this and to have it out in the world, and everybody was so excited about it, and we feel like a little family now, who worked on this book together, and yeah, I would love the chance to do it again.
How long did it take?
the initial drafting, we went through various stages of, everybody signing on, um, and then we brainstormed together and uh, worked out the specifics of where this community center would be, and the types of stories we wanted, and we all agreed to write in the first person present tense to try to give it more continuity between stories. Even though it is different characters and different authors and different voices, it still feels a bit more unified that way.
Mhm.
And once we decided on who our individual characters would be and their names, we created a document where we could share details of, the theme of our story and a little bit about our characters' personalities, so we could weave each other's characters into our own stories. And then we all wrote, well, I actually wrote my story last, but the other writers wrote their drafts, and we did some, revisions until it felt ready to piece all the stories together. And that was my job of deciding what order to put them in, going back and asking the writers to weave in elements of the bigger backstory. And then I wrote my story and inserted it in the place I thought it fit. So all of that, from inception to the final draft, probably took at least a year.
Mhm.
And, we had a switch with our editor in the middle, so that caused a little bit of a delay. But yeah, all in all, it was, a pretty smooth process, and fairly quick overall, I would think, considering how many people were involved.
That's surprising to me though, because I thought it was going to be shorter because it was more people.
Yeah, so I think, from idea inception to it being done, yeah, I would say it was about a year. But that includes like selling the book and
Oh, okay. So then it was quicker. Right?
yeah. The actual like
I,
working on it, I
yeah.
would say it was probably about 6 months.
Okay. Well, then that was definitely quicker. Because a lot
Yeah,
of people take like a year to draft alone. So that's why I was thinking you were talking just the
right.
drafting process.
Yeah, no, people were pretty quick with their first drafts. I think I gave everyone somewhere
That's
between
good.
6 weeks to 2 months, and everybody was great about getting things to me in a timely way to keep us on schedule.
Has your life changed now versus before you were writing full time, editing, and all that great stuff?
Yeah, I definitely have more autonomy over my time.
Mhm.
Not working for somebody else, and working for myself. Um, and I feel, I just feel so lucky to get to do this for a living, and to be able to tell stories and connect with kids and be around other authors and educators and librarians and parents and like people who just care about kids. So I
Mhm.
feel like that brings me a lot of joy because it's a really wonderful space to be in. I feel like the things I struggle with are time management and trying to juggle, um, writing with all the stuff we talked about before, like the marketing promotion, the travel, the school visits, and make sure that I'm not failing at anything. I'm trying to keep everything going on top of regular life stuff that comes at you. Um, so yeah, I definitely feel like having more. Um, the biggest change has been turning a passion into a career, and and balancing the moments where you feel like the joy is being squeezed out of it because it is a job,
Mhm.
um, and then regaining the joy through wonderful things that happen, like amazing interactions with readers or, you know, um, teachers or fans. So I feel like it's like anything else, a balancing act.
What are your long-term goals in the industry?
I would like to keep writing and publishing stories as long as I feel like I have them to tell inside me.
Mhm.
I am doing some more mentoring of other writers, and I really enjoy that, and doing some developmental editing as well. So I enjoyed editing this book so much. I'd love to see if in the future perhaps more editing or even more teaching might be in my future. But for now, I'm really happy to focus mostly on writing and doing some editing as well. But we'll see if that changes in the future.
Is the mentoring through We Need Diverse Books, or is that through something else?
I it's some of it's unofficial, some of it's through the Highlights Foundation, Muslim Storytellers Fellowship. That was a program that I participated in as a
That's
mentor from
advice you've
the.
gotten on writing.
What's the best advice I've gotten on writing? I don't know if this is advice as much as it was a relief to hear people say you don't need to write every day to be a writer, because I think I had heard that so much
Mhm.
when I was growing up, and I imagine writers to be so passionate about writing that they did it every day and that they had a specific schedule. And I feel kids visibly, relieve, like exhale in relief when I tell them that I don't write every day,
Mhm.
um, and I don't have a schedule, and um, and I think writing when you feel like doing it will produce better work than forcing yourself to do it when you don't want to. So, um, I get asked all the time about writer's block and how I overcome that. And for me, writer's block is really just being distracted or being confused about my story, or not knowing where to take a story or a character,
Mhm.
and just taking time away from that and doing something else and not feeling like I have to force it. So I really feel like letting your creative self, have space,
Mhm.
is the advice that I've appreciated. And not being too hard on yourself with word counts and page limits, or like the number of hours you have to spend per day doing it.
Okay, and best advice for aspiring authors.
I would say to really read widely, um, while you're writing or before you write, even to really get to know the genre that you're working in, the types of voices that are out there, and to really understand what appeals to you and the style that you like the best, um, and to really be open to critique, because you're going to get a lot of it
Mhm.
from agents and from editors. And so if you're not used to that, it's um, a good thing to experience and get comfortable with. Because I think sometimes, especially as somebody who edited researchers in the past, we
Mhm.
can get very attached to our words and our stories, and you have to be able to you have to learn how to be flexible and to be able to understand that others may not be receiving your writing the way you think all the time. So to get used to that is really helpful. Um, and will, I think, not only make you a better writer and your story better, but it'll make the process like smoother down the road.
Awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
So, where can people connect with you if they wanted to be mentored or edited, or just find a hub where all your books lie?
um, well, they could find me online on my website. So you'll find lots of information about me. I have some resources for educators and a special page for kids. So you can find um, lots of stuff about my books, and um, resource guides and videos and fun things there. So it's just my name, henakhan.com. And there's also a form where people can contact me through that. Um, Also on social media, mostly Instagram, much less anywhere else. So at Hena Khan Books. and I love hearing from readers. I always appreciate reviews, and I'm one of the writers, one of the few authors I know who actually reads all her reviews online, and I go on Goodreads and read them. So thank you to everybody out there reading and reviewing my books.
I love that. What's up next for you? What are you working on now?
I'm working on my second graphic novel, and deciding, and a picture book, and just deciding what my next project will be. And this is a big publishing year for me with 5 books releasing. So a lot of the fun stuff of promoting in the meantime.
That's awesome. How did you do 5 in a year? I'm thoroughly impressed. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Oh, thank you. So it's just sort of just scheduling different publishers and different projects that cropped up and others that maybe got moved. And so because of that, it worked out this way. So all 5 are different genres. So I have a contemporary middle grade drawing Dina that came out in February, the anthology that just came out last week, and then I have a picture book in a couple of weeks, and my graphic novel debut coming out in the summer, and then a co-authored book, book 4 in a series called Best Wishes with Sarah Molinowski coming out in the fall. So it's a lot of different types of books.
That wraps up today's Craft Chat Chronicles with JD Mayo. Thanks for joining us. If you liked the episode, please comment, subscribe, and share. For show notes, writing workshops, and tips, head to jdmayo.com. That's jdmayo.com. While you're there, join JD's mailing list for updates, giveaways, and more.
And I wish you all the best, continued success.
I really
You have a
appreciate it
blessed
so
week.
much.
Bye.
You too.
And I wish
Thank
your
you. You
mom
too. You too. And stay strong.
Are you struggling to keep your writing organized? Trust me, I've been there. I want to introduce you to Scrivener, the ultimate program for all writers. You can outline, draft, and even edit all in one place. Whether it's your next novel, screenplay, or even thesis, Scrivener helps you stay focused and finish strong. Scrivener adapts to your workflow. From your first draft to the final edit, it's a writer's secret weapon. Click on the link below and get started on your Scrivener writing journey today.